Bushido という侍の生き方がなくなるにつれて、浪人の大多数はこの腐敗した文化から堕落したでござる。導きや囚人の知恵のないままに、この迷える浪人たちは彼ら自身の規範を見つけなくてはならなかったのでござる。いわば彼ら独自の武士道ということでござるな。とある浪人の一人は刀の道の天才でござった。しかも彼ら師匠を含む彼の道場のどんな人間も彼を打ち負かすことはできなかったでござる。ここで述べるも一人の人物は離反した外国人で誠に日本人に受け入れられることもなければ彼自身もそれを望んでいなかったのでござる。
My, oh my, the rumors were true. You're quite good. It's been a while since I faced a master swordsman like you.
Helming from the mainland of Japan, Jin was dedicated to the samurai way, entirely loyal to the Bushido code. He was top of his class in his dojo, but his sensei was forced to turn his dojo into a training ground for assassins, obligated to kill his top student, who was entirely against the change. The two faced each other, and Jin came out triumphant, but the victory left Jin as a self-imposed Ronin, one who had a bounty on his head. While traveling, Jin eventually met Fu and Mugen, and through a series of misadventures, together, the group searched for the samurai that smelled of sunflowers, all the way from the capital of Edo to the port city of Nagasaki. During their journey, they met other samurai, assassins, ninja, yakuza, and other factions. And throughout their travels, the wandering Jin finally found what he was looking for, a true and honest bond with his companions.
あれほど腕の立つ者に会うたのは2人目だ。
2人目？
昔の知り合いだ。
The man with no name, or as he's called in Japanese, Nanashi, also defected from his warrior clan. In what will be a direct violation of the Bushido code of respect, Nanashi was forced to kill children at the end of a successful campaign. Though hesitant, he carried out the orders, but the deed would forever haunt his nightmares. Shortly after, Nanashi left the army, becoming a vagrant and a wanderer, ashamed of what he had become during the time of war. But a form of redemption would come by way of a small child, who was evading the pursuits of the Ming Empire. Though at first reluctant, Nanashi assisted the young boy, saving him from a cruel ritual of sacrifice. Though it's unclear if he survived his final battle, it is certain that he finally found the solace he was looking for. For this video, I will be examining these characters as they appear in their respective anime series and movie, respectively. For Jin, I will be examining him throughout the Samurai Champloo series. For Nanashi, I will be examining him during the events of the Sword of the Stranger movie. Neither Jin nor Nanashi were extremely acrobatic fighters, unlike their counterparts Mugen and Luo-Lang. Again, they functioned under anime rules, meaning their reaction times were superhuman, evading gunshots and flying daggers alike. However, Jin's technique with his blade was his true talent. He was not inherently quick or agile in terms of gymnastics, but extremely dexterous in his blade work. Nanashi was much the same, but his talents lied with his tactical ingenuity rather than any incredible achievements of acrobatics. Yet Nanashi does hold an advantage over Jin by way of durability and strength. In the finale of his film, he runs several miles to save Kotaro, and after running that distance, he took on several Ming warriors, and finally Luo-Lang, with a set of bruised ribs and half-blind eyes.
痛みがある方が生きている気がする。
This is contrasted by Jin's fight with the blind assassin, Sarah. The moment he started taking hits and injury, his technique fell apart, and he elected to retreat the battle. Unlike Mugen, Jin is not the type of fighter who can sustain a lot of injury and maintain his composure. He he was not brought up and hardened by the lifestyle of a true Ronin or a scavenging pirate like Nanashi or Mugen. And in terms of experiences, he did not suffer as many defeats, top of his class in his dojo, and met with no challengers until Inuyasha and Sarah. So it would make sense that when getting tagged, he would be less likely to hold his own, much like Ronda Rousey got rocked in her first knockout, when previously, she was the only one doing the knocking out. That's not to say that Jin is without his own durability feats, such as his final fight with Kagatoki, where he employed the suicidal open defense technique. It was also noted by the Master Samurai that Jin was able to evade his fatal blows, taking injury with the least amount of damage. But comparatively, Nanashi takes a more decisive advantage. While neither fighter was an extreme speed demon or a wushu-inspired gymnast, they did leverage their advantages in other ways. Nanashi has displayed large amounts of constitution and stamina through demanding affairs, fighting through pain more effectively than Jin. And though Jin might be more dexterous in his blade work, in a pure physical sense, he does not quite match Nanashi by way of durability. Nanashi gets the slight edge for his physical abilities. Both Jin and Nanashi carried katanas and wore no armor. It's true that Jin also bared a wakizashi, wearing the signature Diasho combination, common to feudal Japan. However, he never made use of his shortened blade in active combat, arming the wakizashi more as a symbol and for ceremonial purposes than utility, such as for the ritual of seppuku. The katana was a popular single-edged blade, used by feudal Japan samurai, usually wielded with a two-hand grip. Many Eastern and Western historians hold the weapon in high regard, touting it as the best slashing weapon ever created, though it leaves a bit to be desired in terms of thrusting power. Unlike Western longswords, which were generally much heavier and designed for smashing through robust armor, katanas favor precision, speed, and accuracy. This can even be seen in how samurai wear their katanas, favoring quick draws and dexterity. The goal was often to disable your foe and only use a few strokes rather than several heavy cleaves. Realistically, Jin would have the advantage over Nanashi's katana, as it has been years since Nanashi has last used his blade. In reality, katanas are notorious for their demanding upkeep. They need to be constantly oiled and polished, or else they rust and lose their edge. Of course, this is a non-factor in Nanashi's anime storyline, as he is able to cut clean through a Ming warrior moments after unsheathing a sword he had not used for years. So all in all, there is no real difference between their weapons, outside of Jin's wakizashi, which has never been used in active combat. One could argue against the age and maintenance of Nanashi's blade, but the notion of its strength isn't called into question during the narrative of his film, and neither of these Ronin wore any kind of armor to speak of. Therefore, no edge can be given to either opponent for their weapons and armor. As a pure swordsman, Jin was highly regarded. Kagatoki, nicknamed the Hand of God, remarked Jin as his peer, and other notable assassins have recognized his talent, including, but not limited to, his very own master. By the nature of his solitude, Nanashi was less known throughout the lands of Japan. When he was once a samurai warrior, one of his colleagues, Itadori, held him in high regard, and when Luo-Lang saw how capable he was against his fellow Ming warriors, he knew he finally found an equal. Jin was a master of Mujutsu and Kenjutsu, his skills honed through years of training in his dojo. The discipline taught its students to be of no mind when fighting, no fear. It was a common mantra among the samurai, warriors known for their lack of fear. Against other more orthodox swordsmen, Jin was always a challenge.
Your skills are almost on par with my own. It will be by a razor-thin margin, but you will lose.
But this mastery of the sword and this strenuous training had its limits.
I've got to admit you're much better than I expected. In fact, if we were in a dojo, I might not be able to beat you. However...
For Jin's entire career, he had made himself the master of the dojo, but not the master of the elements, which Inuyasha used against him. I believe it's for this reason that Jin does better against master swordsmen than Mugen. Not necessarily because he is better than Mugen in one-to-one confrontations, though I totally think Jin would be Mugen, But because Jin was a better matchup for pure swordsman, rather than the unorthodox methods employed by Mugen or the assassin Sarah. Jin is a very grounded fighter. Unlike Mugen, who can't stay in one place for too long, Jin subverts his enemies through superior blade work rather than superior physicality, always adhering to proper footwork and precise, direct cutting, small sidesteps rather than wide somersaults. This enabled him to also have a strong defense. His movements were tight, calculated, and clean. More often than not, he evaded his opponent's strikes rather than meeting them head-on. Nanashi was also likely a master of some form of kenjutsu, but unlike Jin, he took on a much more free-form style. He was less tethered by what he learned in the dojo, and he had wartime experience under his belt. What's more, his fight style was quite different from what it would have been during his time as a samurai. After becoming a Ronin, he never used his sword again, disabling his foes through pure ingenuity rather than by way of his blade. Because of this, his environment became his best weapon. A bowl of boiling water, a rock found on the ground, a snow-capped plank, or his opponent's own weapon. Spending so many years not using his katana also elevated his hand-to-hand martial skill. His blade work was also impeccable. When facing Luo-Lang, though completely exhausted and half-blind, he was able to keep up and contend with the accomplished warrior, though it's true he was on the losing end of the fight. Luo-Lang was in better condition, his martial skill was superior, his physicality exceptional, and his swordsmanship unmatched. As I've mentioned before, Nanashi's victory was more of an any given Sunday win rather than a consistent outcome. It's also debatable whether Nanashi survived his injuries at all. Even so, Nanashi was an extremely resourceful fighter, his time away from the samurai actually elevating his martial skill and ingenuity. With regards to Jin versus Nanashi, I definitely think the ingenuity from Nanashi would play a huge factor. We've already seen how difficult it is for Jin to deal with this type of fighter when facing Sarah and Yin Yuyaka. His entire mentality and his experience was within the four corners of a dojo ring. And if this pair were to fight in such an environment, he may have the advantage, though Nanashi has shown he can evade strikes without much room to move about. Out in the open fields of Japan, or on a bridge, or in a bamboo forest, Nanashi would have the edge. But even beyond such a specific location, Nanashi's own ingenuity in a straight-up fight could also push him to victory, or, at the very least, contention. As Mugen was also an opponent that was difficult for Jin to deal with, specifically because of his out-of-box techniques. That all said, Nanashi gets the slight edge for his martial skill and tactics. Unless Jin and Nanashi had to make some extra cash, taking up assassination or bodyguard jobs which forced them to cross paths, I don't think they would actually engage each other in open combat. Generally speaking, they kept to themselves and actively went out of their way to avoid unnecessary fights.
By starting this pointless squabble, you've done nothing but reveal just how vast your stupidity is. Please refrain from these moments of self-grandeur.
Run that by me again?
But if they ever met on the roads of Japan in open conflict, who would come out on top? Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place before the Midland Castle of Doldry. The following is a hypothetical explanation of the possible outcomes. The opening gambit between the two will be a cautious affair, neither very offensive fighters in a general sense. However, it's more likely for Nanashi to take a more aggressive approach after the initial size-up, based on his fight with Luo-Lang. As swordsmen they are almost equal, with Jin being more skilled, contending with Master Swordsman effectively, while Nanashi did struggle against Luo-Lang. Of course, this was within the context of Nanashi's fatigue, and he was able to take on all the drug-induced Ming warriors quite effectively. But instead of pure blade work, he did this through his nuanced and varied fighting style. I see the early engagement as a 2-to-2 split. Jin would have the advantage for his mastery in kenjutsu, but Nanashi would bridge the gap with not only his experienced martial skill, but his more varied use of the environment. Where Jin's potential victories lie in his pure blade work, simply cross-cutting through Nanashi's defenses, Nanashi's potential victories lie in subverting that blade work with distraction. The mid-range fight would be much the same, but I feel as the fight went on longer, it would fall more in favor of Nanashi. Jin does not often adjust his tactics based on the different kinds of fighters he faced. He was true to form, and never stepped out of his regimented techniques. That's why he hit such a brick wall against Sarah and Yuyaka and Mugen. When dealing with a fighter with a drastically different style, or one who uses the environment to his advantage, or one who is simply bounded by no style at all, Jin never altered his own techniques. He was definitely one of the most skilled and pure swordsmen of the time, but he was also limited by that mastery. In the mid-fight, I see Nanashi taking a 2-point advantage. Unlike Jin, he was far more capable of adjusting his style on the fly, though it was difficult for him to contend with someone like Luo-Lang, who was not only a master swordsman, but a mixed martial artist in his own right. Against Jin, he would more easily settle into his opponent's style. The late fight would largely be dependent on each character's stamina and their last-ditch efforts. For instance, the late fight would be the only time we see Jin use his open defense technique, where he would leave himself open just to cut Nanashi clean through, as he did with Kagetoki. But there are two issues with this scenario. One, it's a very dangerous move to attempt. It's a 50-50 gambit, which does not ensure victory, or even his survival, a majority of the time.
It is the only means in which to kill your opponent. When you have no hope of victory, your chances of surviving the encounter are virtually zero. If at all possible, do not ever use this technique.
2. Jin might not even attempt to utilize the technique at all. Nanashi is not a very dominating fighter, such as Kagetoki was, so it may never occur to Jin to even make use of it. Jin would have to feel extremely taxed to even make use of such an all or nothing discipline. But in the late fight, this would be Jin's best chance, which I believe earns him at least one victory point. However, Nanashi does have him beat with superior constitution and staying power in the late fight, and the previous advantages he held earlier will remain unchanged. Of all the scenarios, I see this matchup ending within the scope of the mid-fight. It's unlikely for Nanashi to end the match so early, and the pair is pretty even in that regard. Jin with his pure swordsmanship, and Nanashi with his flexibility. But as the fight would go on, it would tip into Nanashi's favor as he adapted to his opponent, while Jin kept coming with the same Mujushin techniques. And if Jin were perhaps a master, surpassing the skill of Kagetoki, this would be enough on its own. But without that level of pure skill, his inability to make his own adjustments would be his ultimate Achilles heel against Nanashi. And thus, with a 7-10 advantage, Nanashi, the Gaijin, the Red Demon, would be the most likely victor. Of course, this is all my opinion, based on my interpretation of the Samurai Champloo and sort of the stranger lore. Do you agree that Nanashi would take a majority victory? Or do you believe the Champloo Ronin is more likely the victor? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, peace, love, and remember, no mind, no fear, no defeat.